Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reacting to a video called What Do the British Think of the American Revolution? Well, I don't know what they think, but hopefully they've gotten over it by now. But that's what I believe. But I don't know, I'm intrigued. Let's check it out and comment, like, and subscribe.
But what do schools in Britain have to say about the American Revolution? To begin with, on the surface, if one talks to people on the street or reads a British book on the subject, Americans will perhaps be positively surprised to see that today there are no hard feelings in England regarding the Americans' choice to leave the glorious British Empire. May it reign forever. But really, we don't care. It seems like a peachy divorce with no grudges held or hostile views taken. After all, for the last century at least, the UK has been the closest ally of the US in Europe, with mutual support in all major conflicts of the 20th century, and both follow similar policies so consistently that the UK has, on occasion, been ironically referred to as the 52nd state. But there is a catch. While the American Revolution is a cornerstone of American history, in Britain, well, it seems that the subject of the American War of Independence, as it is known in the UK, is rarely mentioned in British education books of past and present, or at least not in any great detail.
So
that's not to say it's not mentioned anywhere, simply that while they may learn a little about early American history, including the War of Independence, it's more of a footnote in British history. It's probably also worth mentioning that when it is mentioned, it is never seen from a nationalistic point of view. For example, we don't angrily shake our fists at a picture of Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. Rather, it's covered frankly, and then we move on swiftly to more interesting and relevant subjects to British history. For example, the focus in history is...
I think it makes sense because, you're talking about British history, so of course they're going to care how this affected us, not the whole thing about, oh, the United States did this and the creation of it.
Is much more centered around things like the Roman times. For example, the legendary resistance of Queen Boudica against the might of Rome, or later periods such as the 100 Years' War and the intrigues of the Tudors, generally trying to keep track of all the beheadings in the Tower of London. In more modern times, emphasis is put on issues such as industrialization, colonialism, and the post-colonization era, as well as the events during the World Wars and internal reforms. As to the aggression of the British Empire...
Also, it just dawned on me, they probably have more history to cover because they're older, so it's just, we don't have time. There's just more things.
While many certainly complain that it's not fully represented, it is far from omitted. British imperialism, for example, in Africa, is of course addressed. So why not focus on the American War of Independence and the birth of one of the most influential nations in modern history? It seems that the lack of details when teaching about American independence is not due to shame, envy, or part of a continuous effort to hide the UK's colonial past, as, say, the case might be in Japan. Rather, the main reason is the unspectacularly trivial fact that the American Revolution is seen as a minor detail in comparison to other events directly related to British history. The US breaking off was simply just one of many nations that did it for a whole lot of reasons. Indeed, if one looks at the larger scope, more than 60 countries celebrate independence from the British Empire, which in its heyday had control over 1/5 of the globe's population. That would amount to, on average, one Independence Day celebration of a country every week in a given school year. A phlegmatic English answer would be to say that we have better things to focus on than every country's Independence Day. So, the American Revolution is equated with other similar events, and it is rather addressed as an armed uprising of an important but distant rural populace against taxes, so hardly unique in history. The importance of ideas such as enlightenment, freedom, and democratic values are viewed by Americans on the basis of their revolution as one prime example thereof. But the schools in the UK, similar to most European countries, focus on other incidents. Some of them are closer to home and widely acknowledged as shaping history, such as the French Revolution. Another example is the post-colonialism era in Asia and Africa as one of the main facets of world history. These, rather than American independence, are considered to provide the historical depth necessary for such discussions in the UK classrooms. Thus, the War of American Independence will most likely come up as an addendum, providing context when dealing with the French Revolution or with trade regulations within the British Empire, as an example of a taxation policy gone wrong. It can also be related to the long-term effects of the 7 Years' War, which may be considered one of the causes that would eventually lead to the higher taxation that in turn ignited the revolutionary actions in the
focus on
Americas. Of course, that does not mean that American history is shunned from British schools, far from it. The developments of civic rights, the role of American industrialization, and the combined efforts with the British in the World Wars and the Cold War are placed highly in various stages of the curriculum, be it in the early key stages of the English system or adapted for older students of 15 to 18 years, such as during the A-level and GCSE exams. To give an example within the history books provided by AQA, that's a blast from the past. Out of more than 30 titles covering the period from the Crusades up to the 21st century, 2 refer directly to the USA. The Making of a Superpower, USA, 1865 to 1975, and The American Dream, Reality and Illusion, 1945 to 1980. The titles are indicative of the thematic stressed in each book. Notice that there is no book specifically dealing with the USA before 1861. Besides these reasons, the lack of emphasis on the American Revolution could be seen as related to the political scene within the UK itself. The UK is regarded by some as a fragile nation, as emphasized by much talk of independence by individual regions, especially in the last decade. The independence of a mainly English-speaking American colony, which is also culturally related to England, is much more on par with the Scottish or North Irish independence movements than, say, the Indian independence of 1947. But to sum up, in general, the American Revolution is not negatively portrayed in British schools, as some might first assume. Rather, it is seen as one of many world history events which are linked to the understanding and teaching of UK history without being particularly vital to it, and thus not really worth covering in depth. And I'll just add on a personal note here that when we started doing this series of how is so-and-so taught in another part of the world, someone asked me this on Twitter, and my response is it's just not taught. We don't really look at it. And, well, now you've had the more in-depth answer. Let's get into today's bonus fact. Ever wonder what the difference between the UK, England, and Great Britain is? Honestly, yes, sometimes, even as a British man. The actual name of the sovereign state we are talking about here is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the UK. The United Kingdom is made up of the countries England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. The confusion of the terms seems to revolve around the term country and the political powers that are perceived based on that word. While the 4 countries that make up the UK are generally considered separate in the minds of locals, and in certain sporting events, their powers for local law and control are devolved from the UK. Think of the 50 states of the United States. While each state has their own set of laws, they are all under the power of the federal government. In the case of the UK, it is somewhat similar, though certain responsibilities are also implied, like healthcare and education, that are delegated to 3 of the 4 countries. The responsibilities that are delegated differ from one country to the next. England is the only country in which the UK does not devolve any powers, and instead it is legislated directly by the UK government. When it comes to international politics, it is the sovereign nation of the UK that is recognised, and not any of the 4 constituent countries. The term Great Britain refers to the landmass that comprises England, Scotland, and Wales. Something that aids in the confusion as to the difference between Great Britain and the UK is that the term is sometimes internationally used as a synonym for the UK. For instance, the UK's Olympic team competes under the name Great Britain, and the ISO, International Organisation for Standardisation, gives the UK the country codes of GB and GBR. This can be confusing, given that the ISO also codes England, Scotland, and Wales as subdivision countries of the UK, but Northern Ireland as a subdivision province. If you're getting the impression that Northern Ireland is the red-headed stepchild of the UK, you may be right, both figuratively and literally, we suppose. The confusion over the definition of these 4 countries in reference to the UK is further muddied up in sporting competitions. There are several international sporting events like the Commonwealth Games and football competitions in which each of the 4 has their own team, and they do not compete under a unified national team. They compete against each other? Under these conditions, their nations are referred to as home nations. Because each team is from a specific home country, it can lead some to think that these countries have political autonomy as well. If you're curious about when these unions between the countries that comprise the UK came about, it happened as follows. England and Wales were joined in 1536. Scotland and England were joined together in 1707, along with the previously joined Wales, to officially form the Kingdom of Great Britain. Ireland decided to join up in 1801, at which point the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland was formed. In 1922, however, many of the southern counties of Ireland decided to remove themselves from the Union, and the UK changed their name to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So, in summary, Great Great Britain is England, Scotland, and Wales. The UK is England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and the full name is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. England is just the part of the island that is England.
England. This is very confusing when you start to explain the little things about Great Britain, England, and it's just very confusing, at least to me. But it's really funny that the whole Great Britain, I don't think I've ever paid that much attention though in global sporting events and sporting competitions, as in the Olympics. I didn't know, they compete under one banner. It's just the Team Great Britain, and it's not a Team Ireland. They don't compete Team Wales. It's not that, or Team Northern Ireland. It's just one thing. So in sporting events, you can have someone, I don't know, from Ireland that's competing with someone, it's in the same team as someone from England or someone from, again, Wales or whatever, or Scotland. But then also they have another type of sporting event in which, no, they're competing against each other. So it's just very confusing. I'm sorry, it just is. I thought I got it. I think I have it right, although sometimes I get a little confused, but it's just very confusing. I think it's okay to know that apparently British people also sometimes get confused. So it's hard for them. Imagine for someone for foreigners, it's just double times as hard. But as for the whole American Revolution thing, I think it's just surprising. I never actually thought they didn't. I don't think, again, that's what I mentioned. I don't think there's going to be hard feelings because it was such a long time ago. I don't think they're still holding a grudge. However, I wasn't expecting it to be so unconsequential for them, because I think, again, maybe this is the American perspective. I think you're thinking about this, it's a huge, you can't skip over this. It's such a huge part of our country's history, the independence, and how they gained their independence, how this country became what it is right now. I think it's crazy to think, it's just a footnote. But I guess maybe, it's just kind of wild to me, and it's really shocking. But I guess if I think about it, and he explained it very well, I don't think, of course, it makes all the sense in the world, because it's really important for you, because you're you're the affected part, you were the one, sort of, I want to gain independence from this from this region. So of course it's going to be more important to you, because you're the one sort of leading the charge, and you're the one whose succession, I don't know, just made the country what it is. So of course we can't skip over. It's a huge part of history that's really important. But I think if I think about it, but think about the perspective from the other side, from the British side, they just kind of didn't care that much. Obviously, when it was happening, of course they cared. But I think obviously, 200 years to 1785, again, 300 years, 250 years, I don't know. Of course, they don't really care that much. It's something that they have to, you have to, because it's history, they kind of have to let the students, and they have to let people know, this happened. This country over here, they decided to gain their independence. But they're not going to go that much in depth, because it's not relevant to us. I think it's more about, obviously, when you're teaching a course on the history, specifically, I think we're talking history, there's just so many things to cover that you kind of have to do you have to go by the relevant bits and just go and either do a very summarized version, or just focus on the most important parts, because again, you don't have infinite time unless you're in college or in your university, and you go more in depth about certain subjects. But when you're talking high school, it's of course you can spend 6 months discussing this, because again, it's not really that important. And something very, I don't think I know, but it's something that or at least I know I knew, but it wasn't something that I hadn't reflected on this. Is apparently, of course, the United Kingdom, yes, not Great Britain, the United Kingdom, the UK. There's so many countries, of course, colonialism and all of that. There's, I think, around 60 countries that gained their independence from the UK. I think it was 60, maybe I'm mistaken, but it was just a lot of countries. So of course they don't really have time. Of course, each of those 60 countries, of course, is going to be relevant, as in our War of Independence. That's going to be, of course, very important. That's going to take a huge chunk of the history of time to explain. But for the UK, imagine if we have to go in depth about those 60 countries or those 60 nations. It would be impossible. They simply do not have the time, because, like I mentioned, it's just high school. We don't have infinite time in order to, we're discussing this country in the next 2 months. And then, again, it's 60 or around 60 or whatever it is they were. it's just a lot of them. So we physically can't, unless of course you actually, I know, at a higher level you go in depth, but I think at a high school level it would be impossible. It's just, hey, these countries, they actually gained their independence from us, and that's it. And it's not about us skipping over because they want to skip this over because they, I don't know, they feel guilt, or because they feel, I don't know, we're holding a grudge against them. We still wish they were ours. No, it's not about that. It's just it's just the thing about being relevant. It's just not that relevant. And like he mentioned, of course, it's going to make a huge impact on the country that actually gained their independence, because they had to rebuild. I think, yes, they had to build a nation from, well, not from scratch, but I think you have to build a nation basically. And again, from scratch or from almost zero. So of course it's going to take more focus, but for them, it's just a footnote. Like he said, it's just a footnote, because again, there's so many of them that it didn't really affected us. It affected us in this particular way. That's it. But it's not going to go, oh yeah, and then we did this and then we did that. No, of course not. And there are certain things that are more relevant, which I think is really important to understand this, how the way they teach history is, yes, of course, there's going to be more things and more relevant things happening, maybe around that time period, or maybe just again in that sort of in that era or close to that, or when that was happening, to the timeline of events. There were just more important things that were affecting us directly, or they created more of an impact, they made it more of an impact. And of course we have to focus on that, because we just do not care about the things happening on the opposite side of the world, even though we, of course, indirectly, or yes, of course, directly, it had to do with us. But I think when you go and see the macro of it all, it wasn't that much of a big deal. There were more important things happening in our backyard or with our neighbors. And of course, that's what we're going to be focusing on, which I think, yeah, well, makes sense, because I think also, like he mentioned, I think in other countries in Europe, I don't really know how much is taught about the American Revolution. I would think maybe not that much. I think maybe it's just, again, maybe they gloss this over. They don't expect you. I don't think they teach about, I don't know, Washington or George Washington or any of that, because why would they care? And I'm putting myself, I think, again, to flip perspectives, I think maybe a country, I don't know, a random European country, I don't know, Albania or Poland, I don't know, just other countries, why would they care about the American Revolution? And I'm thinking, of course, because again, in the United States, you don't really go in depth about, the Polish history or Albanian history. No, you don't, because again, there are countries that are so far away that no, why would we care? They don't really make an influence. They didn't really create an impact into our history, unless of course they know this particular event did create a ripple effect, and that affected us, and that's why you go in depth about this. But of course, it's just, again, it can be a little bit shocking, but if I actually think about this, no, it's not really that shocking, because I think about other European countries, they probably aren't being taught this, but in American schools, they're not being taught the history about those European countries, so why should you be more important than others? I think it's really a thing about, yeah, of course you have to prioritize what's important. And for the country and for the history, to understand the history of your own country. And that's why he mentioned, yeah, of course, there are more relevant things happening in Europe around that time period. So of course you're going to focus on that, because it was literally, this is more concerning, or this is more important in order to understand, I think, whatever, history events came after, or I don't know, whatever more important things they deem sort of more important or more relevant to the actual point. So of course I think it's just kind of crazy to think, oh my god, it's a footnote, how boring. They don't really care. But yeah, I get it. I think it's really, yeah, of course, why would they? And actually, to make a perfect, I think, comparison, I think in the US, how much is taught about the UK history. I think, yeah, of course, a little, but again, they don't really go in depth about this. And yes, of course, they kind of do, but again, it's in a macro level, as in universal history, this was happening in Europe. But they don't really go in depth about, I don't know, the 100 Years' War, or the war with France, with how many wars in France there were. I think maybe, again, you get a glimpse of it, but you're not really going in depth about any of those things. And again, it makes sense, because why would you? There are more important things happening, I think, in the United States, or what would become the United States. So of course they have to focus on that. They don't have to focus on the other parts. So it's really, I think it's interesting, and I hadn't really thought of this. Maybe I was being a little bit, I don't know, I naively thought, Oh yeah, maybe they teach you this. I think it's more universal, but no, it's really how universal it can be. I think universal history, when you're talking about high school, I think levels, I think it's hard to actually do. I know it's kind of hard to create a curriculum about, hey, what are we going to be teaching this kids? I don't know. I think it just really depends on the country in which you're, on the region in which you're located. Because I don't think, again, it's going to be relevant for you, but just the same, I don't think in Asia probably schools are being taught this, because probably they have more important things to focus, and it's just the same. You don't really get taught about Asian history. So yeah, it's kind of, well, yeah, different pears and apples. Can't ever be the same, just because, again, the relevancy of it all, it's going to depend on how did this I think this situation and this events actually affected your own course of history and your own timeline of events. So it's actually, well, yeah, it's harsh, but you know what, makes sense. But on the other hand, other countries do not actually, again, they don't teach you this, just as it's just going to depend. And yeah, it's not just they don't really care about you, which I think may be the most, oh no, they don't really care about us. No, it's not that they don't care, it's just that, again, it's just a lot of things to cover, and just as well, you don't cover us either, so it's fine. No grudges. And that was it for today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.